Hey guys, tonight we're cracking open a window to the past, though the Victorians would really rather you didn't. You're about to step into a world where fresh air is suspicious, drafts are deadly, and a simple breeze might be blamed for your sudden demise. You won't believe how many things were feared in a house like this, and how often those fears shaped real lives. Alright, before you get too cozy, go ahead and smash that like button and subscribe, but only if your heart says yes. And hey! Drop your location and local time in the comments. We're all dozing off from different corners of the world. Dim the lights, get that fan going for some background vibes, and let's chill into tonight's little adventure. You step into a narrow Victorian hallway lined with sepia portraits and wallpaper so thick with pattern it feels alive. The gaslight flickers overhead. You're visiting a friend's townhouse in London, and immediately you notice the stifling air. No breeze, no circulation, not even a cracked window. You reach to unlatch one out of habit. A sharp gasp cuts the air. "Don't!" your host hisses, their eyes wide. "You'll let in the night air." At first you think they're joking, but no, the fear is real. In this household and thousands like it, night air is not just unpleasant. It's believed to carry disease, madness, or even death. Windows stay shut tight after sundown, especially in bedrooms. Drafts, chills, and anything unfiltered by thick curtains or a coal fire are seen as invitations for misfortune. This isn't mere stuffiness. It's a belief rooted in miasma theory, the idea that bad air, especially at night, carries invisible particles of disease. You've heard of cholera outbreaks. The newspapers shout about them. No one here trusts rivers or fog or dampness. The Thames is poison, and the wind that rolls off it. Worse. You pass by a bedroom where the window's key has been physically removed. Along the sill, someone has placed an odd barrier, a folded towel, tight against the frame. "Stops the creeping chill," your host explains. Even children aren't spared. Infants are swaddled and kept in stuffy rooms with fires burning hot. You pass one such nursery and blink. Did you just see an onion dangling in the corner? You lean closer. Yes, hung from the ceiling like some sort of garlic charm. "It absorbs the poison," comes the whisper. "Sucks the illness right out of the air." And yet the irony strikes you. People cough constantly. Their eyes are red-rimmed, their chests wheeze. The coal smoke, the mould, the unwashed bedclothes, the dozens of enclosed spaces all feeding each other's air. Still, no one blames the inside. The outside is what scares them. You can't help but remember something you overheard in a market stall earlier, that a young boy died after sleeping next to a cracked window. "He looked peaceful," the woman said, crossing herself, "but his lungs filled up with the fog." You try not to laugh, but then, can you blame them? This is a time when fog rolls in thick enough to smother lamplight, when the doctor's best guess still includes bleeding or brandy, and where a good draught could mean a bad fever by morning. And it's not just homes. Even hospitals keep their windows tightly shut. You recall reading about a poor man in a workhouse who insisted on opening the pane above his cot, just a sliver, and was accused of suicide. "Letting in death," the matron said, "self-inflicted." You begin to feel it. The tension between what's comforting and what's considered dangerous. The human need for air, for freshness, for breath, pitted against a deeply embedded superstition that air itself might betray you. As the fire crackles in the parlour, you suppress a cough and wonder how long you'll last in a house like this. You glance once more at that window. It's not even sealed, just shunned. As though the pane is glass not just against wind but against fear, against the unknown, and against the idea that some evils might simply float in when you least expect it. You lie awake in the guest bedroom that night, cocooned under a thick stack of quilts that smell faintly of camphor and coal. The fire in the hearth has gone out and the silence feels padded, dense. You can hear your own breathing and nothing else. No breeze, no creaking shutters, not even the soft hush of the wind. Just stale, unmoving air, warmed only by your own body heat. You imagine the fog outside, London's infamous pea supers, rolling past the windows thick with soot and sulphur. You'd heard stories in the pub earlier, one where a man walked into the fog and never walked out, another where the mist was so dense that carriages collided mid-road, horses screaming. The Victorians didn't just fear the night air, they watched it choke entire cities, and so they shut it out. You roll onto your side, facing the wall where a small porcelain angel rests on the mantel. A charm against illness, your host told you, gifted by her mother. It's chipped at the wings. You wonder if that weakens its protection. Downstairs, someone coughs, a dry barking sound that echoes upward through the floorboards. It repeats, then fades. You remember what the maid said earlier, that the master had caught the air last week, and now only takes broth and port wine. She didn't mention a doctor. You think about how the idea of air as evil seems so strange, until you realise that it isn't just about illness, it's about control, a way to blame something, a way to say, this misfortune came from outside me, from a draught, a crack in the window frame, a puff of invisible death, not from bad water, or poor sanitation, or crowded slums, from the wind. You sit up, the bedsheets crinkling like paper. Just across from the bed is a ventilation screen, painted metal with delicate floral flourishes, but it's sealed shut with cloth and tallow. A child's drawing is pinned to it, as if to make it cheerful. You lean in. The paper is yellowing. The child who drew it may already be dead. By morning the window panes are damp with condensation. Your breath mists as you sit at the breakfast table sipping weak tea. You mention how close the air feels, how heavy. The hostess, ever gracious, nods with concern and places another lump of coal on the fire. You're told it'll clear up once spring comes, but until then, you should avoid the east wind, especially after nightfall. Bad luck rides in from the east. You learn that sailors used to say the same, that a sea breeze after dark was dangerous, and to leave a window open was to invite ghosts aboard your lungs. Some even believed that disease was the breath of the damned, that typhus and consumption were sentient winds, able to slink in and curl up beside you. Your hostess hands you a small sachet of herbs before you leave. Lavender, mint, and vinegar-soaked cotton. A Victorian remedy for bad air, she says. Just tuck it into your pocket, love. Better safe than sorry. As you step outside into the sharp morning air, you feel the cold slice across your face like a truth no one in that house would dare admit. It's not the air that's killing people. It's the fear, the silence, the sealed shut everything. And yet, you keep the sachet just in case. You wake up in a different house now, older, quieter, and cloaked in a strange stillness that clings to the air like thick velvet. You've been called here on short notice. A family friend has passed, and though you never knew the woman well, it would have been improper not to attend. That's the Victorian way. Manners before mourning, decorum before discomfort. As you walk through the entry hall, something feels off. Every mirror, every single one, is covered, not just with cloth, but with heavy dark drapes. The grand hall mirror has been swallowed in black velvet, the kind used on mourning dresses. In the parlour, even the little silver-backed mirror atop the writing desk has a doily draped over it. You glance toward the window for light, and for a moment you see yourself not in glass, but only as a faint reflection in the polished wood of a tea tray. Best not to risk it, says the housekeeper, catching your puzzled look. She gestures to the covered mirrors. The soul hasn't fully left yet. Sometimes they linger, and if a soul sees itself, she pauses and makes a vague gesture, like a string being snapped. It could get stuck. That's the belief anyway. Among many Victorians, death isn't an instant goodbye. It's a delicate transition. The soul is vulnerable, restless, confused. To see its own reflection is to become trapped in the world of the living, doomed to haunt the house or hover between realms. And worse, if you see the soul in the mirror, it might see you back. Upstairs, the bedroom of the deceased is more of the same. The wardrobe mirror is covered with a shawl. The little vanity mirror has been turned to face the wall. Even the puddles of water in the wash basin have been tipped out. No reflections, no risks. You're handed a mourning band to wear on your arm and told not to speak the woman's name aloud, not for 3 days. You oblige. There's a solemnity to the house, a pressure like someone is watching, but you remind yourself it's just tradition, superstition. Still, you find yourself avoiding your own reflection in the glass of a picture frame as you pass. In the kitchen, the maid confesses she's always been afraid of mirrors. Ever since I was little, she says, scrubbing a copper pot. My aunt swore she saw a dead man smiling at her from the hallway glass, smiling and then gone. No one else saw it, but she never looked into that mirror again, not even once. You remember a story you heard once about a photographer who kept a mirror uncovered in his studio, one of the only homes on the street that did during a mourning period. Within the week, he died of a fever no one could explain. His own fault, said the neighbours. Let the spirit in through the glass. Mirrors were not just decor back then. They were thresholds, portals even, fragile gates that, if opened at the wrong moment, might invite something in or let something out. You think about how many hours you've spent staring at mirrors without fear. Here, they are hidden like weapons or like shame. Downstairs, the undertaker arrives to prepare the body. He's polite, composed, but says little. You notice even he avoids glancing into any reflective surface. When the parlour doors are closed behind him, someone draws the final curtain over the last mirror, muttering under their breath. The funeral is in 2 days. Until then, no one touches the coverings, not even to fix the askew corner of the mirror by the stairs. It's better to let it hang crooked than risk the glint of an eye that no longer belongs in this world. The next morning you wake early, before the servants stir, before the clatter of the morning teacups and the arrival of condolences. The house is blanketed in a hush that feels almost reverent. You slip out into the hallway, still in your nightclothes, feet bare on cold wooden floors. Drawn by something you can't quite name, you approach the staircase landing, where the largest mirror of the house, normally, hangs. You remember it from previous visits, gilt-edged, almost the full height of the wall, positioned so the light from the front windows would make it gleam. It was the pride of the house, and now it's swallowed in thick black fabric. You hesitate, then reach out a hand, fingers brushing the curtain's edge. It feels warm, almost strangely so. You think of lifting it, just a corner, just to see. But a sound stops you. A soft knock. No, not on the door. From inside the room, you freeze. A second knock, then silence. You slowly back away. Later, over breakfast, you ask about the mirror. The butler, older than most and stiff with propriety, says only, "The lady's mother kept it uncovered after her husband died. She went blind within the year." He stirs his tea, not looking at you. Some say it was grief. Others say it was what she saw. You want to laugh, not out of mockery but disbelief, blind from grief or from a soul glinting through glass. It sounds like a fireside ghost tale, and yet these stories have roots. The Victorians saw death everywhere. Life expectancy was low. Disease came fast, and they built systems, elaborate ones, to soften the blow. Mirrors, to them, were not just reflective. They were active, dangerous, capable of mischief. Later that day, the drawing room is open for final viewing. You're told you may come say goodbye before the casket is closed. The woman lies peaceful and powdered, a white veil over her face. You feel oddly shy in her presence, as though she might sit up and speak, but something else captures your eye. Above the hearth, a small frame has been knocked ajar, one you don't remember seeing the day before. It's a miniature mirror, one of those decorative ones meant more for symmetry than use, barely 5 inches tall, and it's uncovered. You don't say anything, but your pulse quickens. After the funeral, while the house is hushed and guests sip sherry in low tones, you wander back to the drawing room. The mirror is still bare. You glance into it, just a flicker, and there, behind your shoulder, a blur. You spin. No one there. You laugh, uneasy, blame the stress, the stuffy air, the stories, but you don't look again. Weeks later, when you return home, you catch yourself doing something odd. You hang a scarf over the small mirror in your hallway. Just for a few days, you tell yourself. It's silly, of course. But the image of that narrow, bare glass in the morning room lingers in your mind. Sometimes it's not what's reflected that frightens you, it's what might still be looking back. You arrive just in time to hear the last chime. It's a countryside estate this time, a grand, draughty old place nestled in the hills, where the fireplaces are large enough to stand in, and every hallway smells faintly of dried lavender and thyme itself. The master of the house has just passed and the family is gathering in black. You're not even sure who invited you, a cousin perhaps, or an old friend. But once again, you've stepped into the hush of Victorian mourning. This house, unlike the last, isn't still. There's a quiet chaos to it. Servants rush back and forth carrying black drapery. The undertaker has already arrived. A tailor is being summoned for a mourning suit. But one thing happens with eerie precision. Every clock in the house is being stopped. At exactly 5:37 p.m, that's the moment he died. You're there in the drawing room as the butler gently opens the case of a tall grandfather clock, reaches in and stills the pendulum. The silence that follows is strange. The ticking was so constant, so unremarkable, until it vanishes. Now it feels like the room is holding its breath. You follow him from room to room, watching the same ritual. The little brass clock on the mantel, the chiming carriage clock in the study, even the kitchen's clunky wall clock shaped like a shield, all stopped, all to 5:37. Is it a tradition, you ask? The butler's voice is low. It's a kindness, he says, to time, to the soul. We stop it so the spirit knows it need not be rushed. There's more to it than that. You hear whispers between the staff, that if the clocks continue ticking, the soul may be trapped in the house, confused, unable to pass on. Or worse, it might try to stay on schedule, hovering, waiting for the next hour to strike, unwilling to depart until the clock releases it. One chambermaid insists her aunt forgot to stop the clocks after her brother died, and for weeks after, they heard footsteps at exactly midnight, every night. Nothing else, she says, just the sound of someone arriving, but no one ever came. You don't quite know what to believe, but there's something haunting about it. The stillness of the house now feels suspended, like even time itself has bowed its head in mourning. Without the ticking, the silence grows heavy. You realise how much the clocks filled the space, their rhythm like a quiet heartbeat under everything else. That evening you find yourself alone in the study. A fire crackles in the grate. The curtains are drawn. The little brass clock on the desk shows 5:37. It always will. You stare at it. And for a brief, absurd moment, you wonder, if he walked back into the room, now, would the clock start ticking again? In the hallway, someone drops a teacup. It shatters, and the sudden noise jolts your heart. You're not the only one unnerved. One of the nieces, a pale young woman in lace gloves, insists on spending the night with her door open in case the stopped hour visits her. She claims she heard him sigh, just once, at the top of the stairs. A parlour guest, trying to comfort her, jokes that maybe he simply forgot his watch. But the maid shakes her head solemnly. He had a watch, she says, nodding toward the side table. And it stopped too. You glance at the little silver pocket watch resting beside a black armband. 5:37. Of course. Even the timepiece he carried with him, halted, obeying the invisible rule. You go to bed that night in a room that doesn't have a clock at all. You check your own watch out of habit, and then feel a flicker of unease. You consider stopping it, just while you're in the house, just in case time, here, doesn't like to be reminded that it's still moving. The next morning dawns grey and flat, like someone's drawn a veil over the countryside. The estate feels quieter than ever, as though the stopped clocks have pulled the sound out of the very walls. Even the birds outside seem hesitant to sing. You make your way down the creaking stairs and into the breakfast room where the fire struggles against the damp chill. Only one other person is there, an older gentleman with an impeccable cravat and the weariness of someone who's seen too many funerals. You sit across from him, and he offers a stiff nod before returning to his teacup. The silence stretches between you like a second table. Then he speaks. "You know," he says slowly, "when my brother died, my mother stopped the grandfather clock so thoroughly, we never wound it again. It just sat there, mute, for 27 years. We called it the ghost clock." You raise an eyebrow. "Why not restart it?" He shrugs, staring into the steam rising from his tea. She said if it ticked again, it might bring him back, and she wasn't sure if that would be a kindness or a cruelty. Later, you walk the halls again, your footsteps echoing slightly in the absence of time. Without the metronome of ticking, everything feels unmoored, like the house exists outside of normal rhythm. You wonder how long they'll leave the clocks like this. A week? A month? Some households, you've heard, never restart them at all, especially if the death was sudden or particularly tragic. One of the younger boys has made a game of it. You catch him sneaking around with a little tin wind-up toy, holding it to each clock as if testing whether one will start ticking again. He gets caught and scolded by his nurse, who mutters, "Don't play with time, boy. It remembers." That afternoon, the parlour is filled with subdued conversation. A guest mentions a friend who refused to stop the clocks when her husband died. "She claimed it was morbid," the woman says, sipping from a cup of weak Darjeeling. But the very next morning the cuckoo clock shattered, burst from the wall. The cuckoo never came out again. You overhear a different guest quietly advise another to restart her watches by winding them backwards, so the soul won't notice. That evening the family gathers for a final prayer in the drawing room. The fire is high, the curtains drawn tight, the scent of beeswax and wood smoke thick in the air. Someone speaks of the master's kindness, another of his punctuality. You glance around at the silent clocks, all frozen in unison at 5:37. It's almost poetic. The next day, as you prepare to leave, you stop by the front hall to retrieve your coat. A young maid is standing by the long case clock, feather duster in hand, frozen mid-motion. "It moved," she whispers when she sees you. You peer at the clock face. The hands still point to 5:37. Nothing unusual. She doesn't blink. "I swear it did. Just a tremble, like it wanted to start again." You give her a small smile and gently guide her away. Probably the wind, or imagination, or grief. This house is full of all three. Still, as you step outside into the sharp morning air, your eyes drift to your own pocket watch. You hadn't touched it since arriving. It ticks merrily at your side, indifferent to the customs of the house, and yet, without thinking, you pause and move the hands back a minute, just to be polite. The cart rattles through the narrow country lane, its wooden wheels clattering against stones slick from last night's rain. You're seated beside the driver, a wiry man with wind-chapped cheeks who hasn't said much since he picked you up from the village. Ahead of you, the church steeple rises from the mist, flanked by rows of ancient yew trees hunched like mourners. It's a funeral day, but not in the way you're used to. When you reach the lane's bend, something strange catches your eye. Straw. Bundles of it, tied tight, scattered deliberately along the dirt road in front of the gate. Long golden strands lie like breadcrumbs or wards or warnings. The driver slows. "We'll go around," he mutters. You squint through the mist. The churchyard gate is roped off, and the straw leads not to the entrance but around it, a strange winding path toward the side door. "What's all that for?" you ask, curious. The driver glances at you sideways. Keeps the spirit from coming back. Of course it does. He doesn't elaborate. But when you arrive at the small stone cottage where the family is gathered, the same pattern appears again. Straw at the threshold, another bundle at the gatepost, even a small pile tucked behind the kitchen door. It's not for walking on, and it's not for warmth. It's deliberate. A message for the dead, and perhaps for whatever follows them. Inside, the air smells of peat smoke and rosemary. The body lies in the front room, laid out with the usual care. Hands folded, eyes closed, coins placed just so. A thin white cloth covers the face, but it's the straw again that draws your gaze. A braid of it lies along the windowsill. Another runs under the bed. You whisper your question to one of the granddaughters, no more than 12, seated stiffly on a stool. So the spirit gets confused, she answers, without even looking at you. It won't find its way back home. You'd heard of this before, strewing straw to muddle the dead, to make them lose their way between the grave and the doorstep. Especially in rural areas where old customs never really died, just softened. Straw paths, crisscrossed thresholds, even reversed horseshoes or turned-around coats, all to trick a soul that might not want to leave. After all, not every ghost comes to haunt. Some just come home. The priest arrives, young and clearly a bit uncomfortable with the setting. You can tell he's more used to reading clean prayers than navigating local beliefs. He glances at the straw once, then wisely says nothing. Outside, the mist thickens. The coffin is carried out gently. No weeping, no drama. Just a slow, sombre walk. But the moment they pass the threshold, the procession turns sharply left, away from the normal gate. It follows the straw path exactly, winding around the house and out through the back fence, where a narrow trail leads to the graveyard. You walk behind them, boots squishing in the damp earth. The straw has softened the path, but there's no doubt this isn't just practical. It's ritual. A curve instead of a straight line. A journey meant to confuse something unseen. And when you reach the grave, a final bundle is thrown in atop the coffin before the soil is returned. The straw hisses as it meets the wood. You wonder if it's meant to pin the spirit down, or simply keep it warm. After the burial, the mourners disperse quietly, pulling shawls tighter and tipping hats against the drizzle. But you linger a little longer, watching as the final bit of earth is patted down, and the gravedigger, an older man with a muddy spade and a limp, kneels to press something into the soil at the foot of the grave, a small twist of straw bound with red thread. You ask him what it's for. He doesn't answer right away, just wipes his brow with the back of his hand and mutters, "Insurance." You raise an eyebrow and he clarifies, in case the poor soul forgets which way's forward. You want to ask more, but something about his tone says don't. You let it be. Back at the cottage, you're invited to stay for the wake. The rooms are crowded and warm, filled with murmuring voices and the smell of broth, damp wool, and something sweet baking in the oven. It's not exactly festive, but it's not grim either. There's relief in the air. The straw has done its job. The path was walked. The rules were followed. No one says it outright, but the tension has eased. You overhear stories of times it wasn't done. One woman says her cousin's husband died and they never laid the straw, on account of modern thinking. Within a week they heard footsteps in the attic and doors slamming at odd hours. The baby wouldn't sleep. The dog barked at corners. They laid straw after that, just to be safe. Another guest leans in with a more unsettling tale. A farmer buried in haste without the proper bend in the procession. Straight-line burial, she whispers. The worst kind. The family had to abandon the house within a year. He walked it straight back. You glance around the room. No one laughs at these stories. No one smirks. It's not that they believe every word, but in this place, belief isn't required for the ritual to matter. It's about rhythm, about doing what was done before, about not being the one to tempt the old rules. Later, when you leave, your boots brush the last bits of straw still scattered near the gate. The wind has picked up, and some of the strands are lifting, curling, twirling slowly across the yard like little golden question marks. As you pass through the gate, you glance back. The house looks ordinary again. No eerie glow, no movement in the windows. Just a cottage like any other, only lighter now, like something's truly gone. The driver who brought you stands waiting, reins loose in his hands. "All done then?" he asks. You nod. He tilts his head toward the yard. "They laid the straw right this time. That's good." You pause just before climbing into the cart. "Do you believe in it?" He shrugs. "Doesn't matter, does it? The dead do." And with that, you ride away from the cottage, the smell of damp straw fading behind you, and the uneasy comfort of old customs settling in your bones. You're ankle-deep in dust standing in the cramped crawl space beneath a crumbling cottage, when your lantern flickers and reveals a shoe. Not a modern one. This is an old leather thing, cracked and shriveled like an apple left in the sun. The toe curls upward. The sole is stitched by hand. It looks intentional somehow. You call up through the floorboards to the builder helping you restore the place. He peeks down, sees it, and lets out a low whistle. "Don't touch it," he says immediately. "It's there for a reason." You blink. A reason? Someone forgot their shoe under the floor? He climbs down beside you and shakes his head. Nah, they put it there. Victorians did that all the time, to trap evil. You wait for a laugh, but he's serious. You turn back to the shoe and realise it's not alone. Behind the beam, tucked in the dark, is a second one, child-sized, worn almost to nothing, and next to that, tufts of fur. Your stomach turns a little. You shine the lantern closer. Bones. A small skull. It takes you a moment to understand what you're seeing. A cat, or what's left of one. The builder sighs. Yeah, that's a classic. Dead cat in the wall. Keeps witches out. Or curses. Or luck, depending who you ask. This isn't in the restoration manual. You step carefully through the dirt, now suddenly aware of every beam, every hollow. You start spotting other things. A broken bowl near the chimney base, scraps of paper with strange symbols, charcoal markings that might once have been words, and above it all a thick silence, like the house itself is waiting. Back in the daylight you sit on the stoop, brushing dirt from your hands. The builder joins you, pulling a flask from his jacket. Folk magic, he says simply. Building magic. Old houses have it in the bones. You'd always thought of Victorians as prim, rational people, full of stiff collars and strict morals, but under that polished surface lived a very different world, one where concealment magic was baked into brick and beam, hidden shoes, mummified cats, even jars of urine buried in the hearth. Objects meant not to be seen, but to ward off what couldn't be named aloud. You ask him if they really believed it worked. Maybe, he shrugs. Or maybe it just felt safer, having something between you and whatever was out there. Shoes were the most common. Always old, always worn, never new. The idea was that evil spirits were drawn to human scent, and shoes soaked in sweat and wear made perfect traps. Once the spirit entered, it wouldn't leave. But the cats, those are harder to forget. No one quite agrees on their meaning. Some say the cats were already dead, placed as guardians. Others whisper darker tales of cats entombed alive, their spirits tasked with eternal protection. It's uncomfortable to think about. But in an age when disease and misfortune were constant threats, you begin to understand the desperation behind the ritual. The Victorians didn't just fear the supernatural, they built around it. You can't quite shake the feeling. Even after the cat's remains have been gently reburied in a box behind the old hearthstones. Better to leave it close to where it was, the builder advised. The air inside the house has shifted. Lighter in some ways, but also exposed. As though some secret seal had been broken. That evening, over supper at the inn, you ask the innkeeper if he's ever heard of shoes in the walls. He sets down your plate of mutton stew and chuckles. Heard of it? Love, I've done it. He pulls up a chair, ignoring the queue forming behind the bar. Moved into this place when I was a boy. First week Mum finds a lady's boot stuffed behind the upstairs hearth. Proper Victorian ankle boot, laces and all. Bit of lace still on it. You lean in. She wants to toss it, he says, but Gran nearly faints. Says you throw that out and we'll have knocks at the windows by sunrise. So we wrapped it in a cloth and put it right back. Still there, I reckon. He leans even closer, and we never had trouble. Stories like this are everywhere once you start asking. A chimney sweep in a nearby village swears he once pulled 5 shoes out of a single flue. 2 adult, 3 child. Must have been a full family protection plan. A farmer speaks of finding a desiccated rat, bound with twine and tied to a bent spoon, hidden in a roof beam. Sympathetic magic, someone explains. You bind the misfortune before it finds you. You hear whispers of witch bottles too, Victorian apotropaic charms filled with nails, hair, even urine sealed and buried under doorways. The logic: catch the curse before it crosses the threshold. Not everyone believes, of course. Some scoff. But no one removes the items either. That's the line. You may not believe it, but you won't be the one to tempt it. Back at the cottage, you start noticing odd things in the architecture. A crooked beam above a doorway, deliberate you realise. A fireplace with 5 soot-streaked bricks near the base, one darker than the rest. The builder confirms your suspicion. Concealment magic again. They like to confuse whatever was following, make it hard for curses to find the straight path in. Even the windows tell a story. You spot a small cross etched into one corner of the pane, just visible when the morning light hits it. It's not a flaw, it's scratched in by hand. You press your finger against it. The glass is cold. By the time the restoration is nearly done, the builder makes a quiet suggestion. Might want to leave a shoe of your own, tucked away, for luck. He doesn't smile when he says it. It's not a joke. So, on your last day, you take one of your old boots, the left one, worn at the heel, and slide it into the cavity behind the stairs, just above the old cat's resting place. You don't say anything aloud. You don't need to. Some protections don't need words, just trust, sweat, and the shape of something human to fool whatever's watching. You step into the drawing room and immediately feel them watching you. Not the family, though they're here, seated stiffly on polished chairs with cups of tea held too carefully. No, it's the portraits. Lining the walls in elaborate gilt frames, they seem to stare from every angle. Stern-faced men with whiskers like hedgerows, pale ladies in ruffled collars, children holding dogs or flowers or books too big for their hands. You try not to meet their eyes, but something's wrong. You can't put your finger on it at first. Then you realise one of the portraits of a young girl in a blue dress is covered. A white muslin cloth has been tacked gently over the frame like a veil. Another painting, this time of an old man, has been turned to face the wall. It's subtle, it's quiet, but it feels deliberate. You ask someone in a whisper. The response is equally hushed. He's ill, close to death. They didn't want the face to fade. You blink. The painting? No, his face. Ah, this is another superstition you hadn't encountered before, but in this house, and, as you'll soon find, many others, the belief runs deep. Portraits must be covered during illness or death, or risk drawing the soul into the canvas. You glance around again. There are more. One by the staircase, covered in black crepe, another behind the dining room sideboard, half obscured by a towel. You hadn't noticed them before because they blend in so easily, but now the room feels like a theatre where half the actors have taken a final bow and turned away. You're told that a portrait is a powerful thing in the Victorian mind. It's not just art, it's a vessel, a reflection with weight. If the soul is unsettled, wandering, fearful or sick, it might seek itself in a painting and slip inside. Some said the soul could rot there, trapped in oil and pigment. Others feared that a painted face could steal vitality from the living one, like a mirror that didn't reflect but drank. And it isn't just portraits. A servant mentions they once worked in a house where even the painted figurines on the mantel, those dainty porcelain shepherdesses, were turned to face the wall when someone fell ill. They hold on, she said, shivering. Little eyes, little faces, always watching. You don't want them to keep something by mistake. It seems strange, until you start to notice it everywhere. In the guest room there's a painting of a child with a spinning top, but someone's pinned a handkerchief over it. The cloth trembles slightly with the breeze from the window, like the child behind it might move, might breathe. You learn that in some households portraits were never allowed in bedrooms at all, just to be safe, and those that hung in parlours were sometimes commissioned without eyes, blurred or faded to avoid the gaze. Because what if, in your final moments, the last thing you saw wasn't a loved one, but your own painted face, blinking back? The house grows quieter after sunset. You sit in the drawing room once more, lit only by the low fire in the grate and the faint shimmer of gaslight filtering through the fogged window panes. Most of the family has gone upstairs to rest. The sick room is still, and the doctor, called earlier in hushed tones, has yet to return. Across from you, 2 portraits remain uncovered. One is of a young man in uniform, the father's cousin, lost to a fever in India. The other is a matron in stiff black satin, staring out with the kind of grim authority that makes you straighten your spine when your eyes meet hers. The rest, 8 by your count, have been draped, turned, or entirely removed from the walls. You're left alone for a moment, and in that moment, the room feels different. Not sinister, not haunted, just attentive. Like it remembers. Like the wallpaper and wainscoting have witnessed this process before. The coughs, the black cloth, the scraping of chairs as mourners lean forward to listen, the flutter of thin curtains as a window is cracked just enough to let the soul slip out, if it chooses to. You stand and move closer to one of the covered frames. The fabric isn't thick. You can still see the outline of a chin, the hint of a ruffled collar. You're tempted, just for a second, to lift it, but you don't, because now you've heard the stories, like the tale of the governess who uncovered a portrait while her mistress was on her deathbed, simply to clean the glass. The very next morning the woman died, and the portrait changed. A new line at the mouth, a glint in the eye that hadn't been there before, or the one about the child who was buried with a locket containing a miniature painting. Weeks later, the image faded until the face was gone entirely. He took it with him, they said. His soul needed somewhere to go. You think back to the houses you've stayed in, how many portraits you've walked past without a second glance, how many faces you've carried in your periphery, how many moments in history were recorded not just for memory, but for containment. You wonder if the Victorians knew something we don't, or if they simply feared everything too much to leave anything to chance. There's a kind of genius to it in a way, turning superstition into safety, turning fear into etiquette. Draping portraits wasn't just ritual, it was control, a way of saying, not today, not this face, not this soul. Later that night, just before bed, you catch your own reflection in the glass of a frame print in the hallway. You pause. Then, with a sudden urge you can't quite explain, you take the embroidered handkerchief from your coat pocket and gently lay it over the frame. Not because you believe, but because tonight you might. The garden party is in full swing. You arrive fashionably late, stepping out onto a manicured lawn dotted with parasols, lawn chairs, and well-dressed guests balancing saucers and scandal. The hedges are trimmed like soldiers. The air is thick with perfume, pollen, and something more pungent. Gossip. A quartet plays under the gazebo. There are scones, there is lemonade, and, surprisingly, there is celery. Everywhere. Long stalks of it arranged in porcelain vases, chopped bits in dainty sandwiches, celery soup in a silver tureen, even candied celery on the dessert tray glistening like tiny emerald glass. You blink. You hadn't known celery could be candied, or that it warranted this level of reverence. "Don't stare," murmurs a voice beside you. You turn to find a woman in a feathered hat and a tartan shawl, eyes twinkling with mischief. "It's the spinster," she says, gesturing subtly toward a lady standing stiffly near the hydrangeas. You follow her gaze. The woman in question is striking in a quiet, formidable way. Unmarried, perhaps mid-30s, dressed in a modest dove-grey gown and sensible shoes, and tucked neatly under her arm, a single stalk of celery. Your brow furrows. Is that supposed to mean something? The woman beside you snorts. Means everything, darling. That's an announcement. Now you're properly intrigued. Because in Victorian England, celery wasn't just food. It was a signal, a symbol, and for single women, it could make or break a reputation. You learn that celery was once a rare delicacy, expensive, difficult to grow, and seen as highly fashionable. Whole glass houses were built to raise it, and the wealthy paraded it like trophies. Some households even had celery vases, tall, fluted, crystal vessels designed specifically to display stalks of the stuff on the dinner table, like a floral centerpiece. But in the social circles of marriageable women, celery took on another layer. It became a subtle tool of courtship, a symbol of romantic intent. For a gentleman to gift a lady celery was to declare interest. For a woman to be seen holding it, especially alone. Well, she's trying to signal availability, your companion whispers. Or worse, pretending someone gave it to her. Poor dear. You glance back at the woman in grey. She's standing stiffly, looking anywhere but at the celery in her hand. People are watching, but not approaching. Then you catch it. A tiny twitch at the corner of her mouth. Not a smile exactly. More like the smallest crack in a carefully composed mask. You wonder if she brought it herself. If she's using the celery as armour. If this is her quiet rebellion against the pitying glances, the dwindling prospects, the endless whispers of poor thing still unmarried. Or perhaps it's not rebellion at all, but hope. At the refreshment table, a man in a waistcoat and pince-nez selects a stalk from the vase. He glances toward the spinster, hesitates, then sets it back. No words exchanged, but everything said. You drift through the party, the scent of cut grass mixing oddly with cucumber sandwiches and strained politeness. The woman with the celery hasn't moved much. She stands like a statue near the edge of conversation, her hand still clutching the stalk. No one speaks to her directly, but every so often someone glances her way, then quickly looks elsewhere. It's as if she's broken a rule no one wants to admit exists. One older woman whispers loudly enough for you to hear, "If I had done something like that at her age, I would have been shuffled off to Bath before tea time." You're not sure whether it's scandal or sympathy in her voice. You ask your companion about that. Bath, she smirks. Oh, you know, the place for fainting nerves, questionable widows, and women who've embarrassed the family name. Very restorative, very out of sight. You wonder what offence the spinster has committed, really. Existing, hoping, holding a vegetable. It's oddly tragic. The celery itself, so green, so crisp, so ordinary. Yet here, it's loaded. A single stalk becomes an entire monologue of longing, of defiance, of shame. You think of the stories you've heard today. One woman once received a bouquet of celery from her fiancé instead of flowers. Another was proposed to with a celery stalk, a rare and cheeky gesture among the brave. But for most women, celery could quickly tip from flirtation to humiliation. You glance back and notice something new. The celery woman has vanished. You spot her hat bobbing behind the rose trellis, moving swiftly toward the stables. A moment later, another figure follows. A man in a dark coat. You don't see his face. You say nothing. You hear nothing more of them that day. But that evening around the fire, the partygoers trade theories. Some say she left in disgrace. Others claim she was invited on a walk by one of the bachelor cousins. One person swears she was seen weeping into a basket of chopped celery in the kitchen. But you remember that flash in her eyes, that sliver of calculation, that tiny smile, the size of a secret. You think she planned it. The celery wasn't a cry for pity. It was a signal, and someone finally read it. You sit by the window and watch the sun fade. On the table nearby, the celery vase is half empty now. A stalk leans sideways, forgotten. No one will touch it. Not tonight. In the end, the spinster didn't disgrace herself. She wrote a story no one could quite read and slipped out through the punctuation. You're staying the week in a respectable boarding house. Respectable in the way that means lace antimacassars on every chair and the faint scent of boiled cabbage in every room. Your landlady, Mrs. Rexley, is the sort of woman who seems to have been born frowning. Her hair is pulled so tightly into a bun that it appears to hold up her posture by sheer force of will. The rooms are clean, the meals are punctual, and the rules are abundant. On your second day, as you settle into the little writing desk in your room, you take out your penknife to trim your fingernails. Just a quick tidy before dinner. But before the blade touches keratin, there's a knock. It's Mrs. Rexley herself, standing in the doorway, expression pinched. "Oh," she says, eyes narrowing. "I do hope you're not planning to trim your nails on a Friday." You pause. "I was." She steps inside like a storm front. "No, no, no. We do not cut nails on Fridays in this house. It invites loss." You blink. "Loss?" She nods gravely. "Fortune, family, sometimes worse. Fridays are unlucky days for such things. Always have been. Best wait till Sunday, or at least Monday morning." You stare at your half-clipped thumb. "Is that a common belief?" Mrs. Rexley sniffs. "Among those who still observe proper rhythms, yes. You may do as you wish, of course," she adds, with a tone that implies you very much may not. She retreats, muttering about a tenant who lost a ring and an uncle in the same week after clipping his nails before Friday supper. And now, of course, your evening is cursed. You learn over dinner that this isn't just Mrs. Rexley's oddity. At least 3 other boarders nod solemnly when you bring it up. One quotes an old rhyme: "Cut them on Monday, cut for health. Cut them on Tuesday, cut for wealth. Cut them on Wednesday, cut for news. Cut them on Thursday, cut for shoes. Cut them on Friday, cut for woe. Cut them on Saturday, a journey go. Cut them on Sunday, you cut for evil. And all the week you'll be with the devil." Charming. The woman who recites it then adds, quite seriously, "My sister trimmed her nails before her wedding and caught the gout before the honeymoon." She says this as she salts her boiled carrot, as if gout were a divine punishment for grooming. You start to notice other odd restrictions. One boarder won't sweep the hearth after dusk. Another insists on never putting new shoes on the table, even in the box. A third claims she won't brush her hair more than 50 strokes on Wednesdays, or the ends will split with grief. And you tuck your penknife away. Because maybe it's nonsense. Maybe it's harmless ritual, the kind that gives order to a chaotic world. But you also remember the way Mrs. Rexley looked at you, as if she knew something, as if your fingernails held more than just dirt beneath them. The next morning, the house is strangely quiet. You head downstairs for breakfast, expecting the usual clatter of spoons and soft rustle of newspapers. But today, the table is half empty. The usually punctual Mr. Elbridge is absent. So is the nervous red-haired girl who always sits near the window. Mrs. Rexley moves about with a frown so tight it seems carved into her face. When asked, she murmurs, "Illness," and sets a plate of kippers down with more force than necessary. You look at your fingers, perfectly intact, but still, you can't quite forget her warning. Later that day you stroll through the nearby market to shake the unease. It's a bright Saturday with flower stalls, ribbons blowing in the wind, and fishmongers yelling at full volume. Yet even here, in the cheerful chaos of commerce, the superstition returns. You stop at a booth selling grooming kits, little ivory-handled scissors, files, and mother-of-pearl buffers. As you inspect a set, the old man behind the table asks, "You didn't cut today, did you?" You pause. "Yesterday. Friday." He sucks in a breath, as though you'd just confessed murder. "Best be careful then," he mutters. "Friday clippings fall heavy." You ask where the idea comes from. He shrugs. "Old stories. Bad luck sticks to whatever you cut. Tossed nail bits carried illness, misfortune, even curses. My mum used to burn hers straight after. Said if a bird got hold of them, it could build a nest and trap your soul inside." That night, back at the boarding house, the missing tenants have returned, looking pale and shaken. Mr. Elbridge claims his cart overturned on the road to Gloucester. The red-haired girl won't speak at all, just sits at dinner picking at her potatoes with a haunted look. You glance down at your hand again. You still haven't finished trimming that thumbnail. After supper, you retreat to your room and retrieve your penknife. You think about finishing the job, just the one nail, but the rhyme returns to you whispering, "Cut them on Friday, cut for woe." Instead, you slip the knife back in its pouch and decide to wait. You light the bedside candle, pull the curtains tight and sit still for a moment, listening. You could swear, faintly, you hear a tapping, soft, like something trying to find its way back through the cracks in the floorboards. You blow out the candle and sleep with your hands under the covers. You're in a cramped London tea shop, the kind tucked into the corner of a crooked alley, where the buildings lean toward one another like they're sharing secrets. The window is fogged from within, the bell above the door jingling faintly as you enter. Inside, it's dim, warm, and oddly quiet, save for the gentle clink of saucers and the occasional low tisk from the woman behind the counter. She doesn't greet you, just eyes you for a moment, as if checking for something invisible. You're shown to a table near the back, where the floral wallpaper peels slightly at the corners, and a mismatched trio of porcelain cats watches from a high shelf. As you sit, your server, a woman in a shawl pinned tight around her shoulders, places a cup in front of you without asking what you'd like. A simple teacup, chipped slightly on the rim, but it's not the cup that catches your attention, it's the salt. A small pile of it, neat, precise, is nestled in the saucer beneath the cup. You hesitate. Is this for luck? The server doesn't smile. For protection. And then she's gone. You sip the tea, strong, bitter, no milk. But your mind is turning. You've heard of this before. The evil eye. An old belief, ancient even before the Victorians, but very much alive in the 19th century, especially in poorer districts, especially among immigrants and old souls who refused to trust progress over tradition. The idea was simple. Envy is dangerous, but not just emotionally, spiritually. If someone looked upon you with jealousy, resentment, or ill will, even unconsciously they could curse you. Illness, misfortune, soured milk, broken limbs, love lost, crops failed, all blamed on a look, a glance held too long, a compliment with a twist of bitterness. To prevent it, the Victorians had their own methods. You've now seen one, salt in the saucer, a discreet ward, meant to catch the gaze, dissolve the envy, protect the drinker. It had to be placed just so and never spilled, or else it worked in reverse. You glance around the tea shop now with new eyes. On the wall behind the counter is a horseshoe, upside down to catch the luck. A sprig of rosemary sits in a little vase, dried and curling. Hanging above the door is a tiny glass orb with a blue dot at the centre. Something foreign, perhaps Greek or Turkish in origin, now adopted here like everything else. You realise this shop isn't just about tea, it's armoured, and you're not the only one seeking refuge. Near the fireplace, a woman in black lace dabs her eyes and mutters into her cup. A man in worn gloves stares into his tea like it holds answers. No one smiles, but no one leaves. It's not cosy, but it feels safe, in the way a bunker might, or a church during a storm. And you? You sip, careful not to disturb the salt, because if a glance can curse, perhaps a saucer can save. You finish your tea slowly, not because you're savouring the flavour, it's too bitter for that, but because you're watching. Every table holds some variation of the same defence. One woman has placed a teaspoon across the rim of her cup, balanced with impossible precision. Another has turned her saucer exactly 3 times before sipping. At a table near the window, a man taps his cup twice before each swallow. Rhythms, patterns, habits. But these aren't quirks, they're rituals, and every one of them has the same goal, warding off the evil eye. You notice the salt again. Some guests stir it into the tea without flinching, others dare not touch it. You wonder what happens if the salt clumps, or if it dissolves too fast. You wonder if the cup can tell. The woman behind the counter, whose name you now learn is Mrs. Penlow, calls you over after you pay. She peers at you with a knowing expression and says, "You've been stared at recently, haven't you?" You blink. "What do you mean?" "The look," she says, tapping her temple. "It sticks to people. I can smell it on you. Heavy, like wet wool." You try to laugh it off, but she's already rummaging in a drawer. She pulls out a small paper packet and presses it into your hand. Inside, dried rosemary, a pinch of salt, and something grey and crumbly that smells vaguely like ash. "Keep that in your pocket," she says. "Left side only. Right side's for giving, left side's for guarding. If you wake up with a headache behind your right eye, burn it." You want to ask more, but she's already turned away. Outside, the fog is creeping back in. You walk the city differently now, shoulders a little tighter, steps a little more deliberate. You catch glances on the street and hold your breath when someone stares too long. You start to recognise others like you, people who turn in mirror flashes, people who touch their left collarbone 3 times after a compliment, people who spit, very discreetly, after receiving praise. You read once that in some villages, mothers rubbed soot behind their babies' ears to ward off jealousy, that women in factories tied red thread around their wrists to keep co-workers' envy at bay, that some people broke plates just before big announcements to release whatever gays had been waiting to follow them home. One afternoon, while writing in your journal at the park, a boy skips past and calls, "Nice pen!" His mother immediately clucks her tongue and spits, right onto the path. She mouths, "Sorry," and hurries away. You don't even flinch. That evening, as you set your teacup on the windowsill, you toss a pinch of salt into the corner of the room, just for good measure. It lands soundlessly in the dark. Because even if you don't believe in curses, it's nice to have something watching your back that isn't a person, especially when people can curse you without even meaning to. You're standing in a photography studio that smells faintly of chalk dust and old varnish. It's quiet, save for the slow, scratchy adjustment of a large wooden camera. The photographer, tall, bony, and wrapped in a long apron, fusses with a brass dial. His assistant is pinning back curtains to let in more winter light. You're not quite sure where to stand, because the subject of today's portrait is already dead. He's propped delicately in a chair by the window, chin slightly lifted, hands folded neatly in his lap. A stiff collar presses against his jaw, and a velvet cravat has been arranged just so. His eyes are closed, but someone has taken the trouble to paint his eyelids, rosy at the edges, with just the faintest stroke of blue where the lashes should be. "You're early," the assistant whispers. "We haven't done the eyes yet." You freeze. "The eyes?" She nods toward a lacquered cabinet on the side wall. Inside, glass eyes, painted, photographed, sketched, neatly organised by shade and size. Some are tiny photographs glued to thin sheets of card, others are hand-drawn. "We'll place them over the lids," she explains. Makes them look more present. This is your first time witnessing post-mortem photography, but for the Victorians it's an art, and in some households, almost a requirement. When death came suddenly, or too young, or after too long a gap between visits, a final photograph offered something to hold, a moment to anchor the grief, and they were rarely gruesome. The dead were posed gently, lovingly, sometimes even standing, supported by hidden braces. They were seated with siblings, cradled by parents, or laid peacefully in bed, dressed in their Sunday best. If done well, the resulting image might look like a sleeping person, still, serene, alive, if only just. The photographer removes the lens cap. The long exposure begins. Everyone holds their breath. You glance at the body again. You've never seen a face so still. In this light, with the painted lids and stiff posture, he could almost be... No. You shake the thought. But then you remember something you heard once in a tavern. A rumour, spoken half in jest, about a photograph where the subject's eyes opened during the exposure. Just a blink. Nothing more. But it showed up on the plate. The photographer went mad. You step back slightly. The assistant notices and grins. "You've heard the stories?" You nod. Slowly. "They're not true," she says. "Well, not usually. Only the very first day. Sometimes there's a twitch, a shift. The muscles don't know they're done." You try to focus on the camera instead, on the strange ballet of technique and tenderness this practice requires. The photographer murmurs gently to his subject. "There we are, lad. Chin up. Let the light find you." You wonder how many families keep these photos framed, displayed among the living. How many visitors glance at the wall and never realise they're being watched by someone who hasn't breathed in weeks, or months, or more. The plate is finished. The assistant lifts it gently with a gloved hand, carries it to the backroom dark box and disappears behind a curtain. You remain in the studio with the photographer, the silence settling thick between you, The subject sits unmoving, of course, his pose steady, lips closed, eyelids painted. But you can't help glancing again at those faintly lifted lashes. They don't move, not even a flicker. Still, something about the air has changed, like the room has exhaled. The photographer begins disassembling the camera, his movements practiced and slow. He was 17, he says, not looking at you. Fell from scaffolding, broke the spine clean. He says it not with detachment, but with the weary familiarity of someone who knows too many endings. He nods toward the chair. Mother couldn't get here in time. She asked us to wait for her. She's coming from York. You look again. There is something almost peaceful about the boy's posture now. Even the painted eyelids, strange as they are, have blended into the shadows of the room. The longer you stare, the more the details fade. He becomes more figure than corpse, more memory than body. That was the goal. A door creaks open behind you, and a woman enters, veil down, gloves in hand. She hesitates at the threshold. The photographer straightens, nods solemnly. "I'll make another," he says gently. This is the part that unsettles you most. Because sometimes one photo isn't enough. Sometimes they want the hand in a certain position, the mouth slightly open, the head tilted just a bit more to the side. You've heard of photographers who kept tiny sticks behind the ears to hold expressions. Others used invisible thread to lift a chin to coax a smile. Some families even asked for the living to be posed with the dead. In one infamous case, a widow requested a portrait where she sat holding her deceased husband's hand, posed on a settee as if in conversation. No one could tell afterward which of them was gone. You leave the studio quietly as the mother takes her seat. Outside, the street is loud with clattering hooves and shouting vendors. Life, pushing forward. You glance up at the window of the studio. The lace curtains flutter slightly in the wind. You wonder how many portraits are stored behind that wall. Rows of boys and girls and women and men captured in stillness, never moving, never aging. You think about how the Victorians, with all their superstition and rigidity, still found comfort in this, in capturing the final breath, in making stillness feel less like absence and more like presence. And as strange as it is, these blinking corpses, these painted eyes, you begin to understand. They weren't afraid of remembering the dead. They were afraid of forgetting them, and so they kept them close, in frames, on shelves, and sometimes, if only for a moment, still looking back, you're whistling, just a bit. A soft tune, nothing grand, just a few absent-minded notes as you wander the corridor of a friend's townhouse in Kensington. The kind of whistle that rises naturally when your hands are warm and your pockets are full. A little joy released into the air like steam from a kettle, and then, "Stop that." The voice is sharp, cold, not quite angry but something close. You turn, it's the governess. Tall, tight-lipped, dressed in crisp black bombazine. She's holding a tea tray, but you'd swear the tea is colder than she is. "Don't ever whistle indoors," she says, "especially in this house." You blink. "I didn't mean to be rude." "It isn't rudeness," she says, setting the tray down with a clatter. "It's recklessness." And then she leans forward, just slightly, and lowers her voice. "Whistling calls the devil." "Ah." You smile, but she doesn't. Because to many Victorians this wasn't just a quaint saying. It was a very real warning. Whistling indoors, particularly at night or in someone else's home, was believed to summon bad fortune. Poverty, mischief, or worse. You're told later that sailors thought whistling could stir up storms. Miners believed it echoed underground, waking spirits best left buried. And in certain London homes, like this one, it's thought to let things in. You don't ask what things. Downstairs in the drawing room, you hear a clock chime and the clink of silver on china. Life continues. But you notice now how quiet it is. No humming, no tapping, no music. Even the canary in the corner cage makes barely a peep. The children read their books in utter silence, too still for comfort. At dinner, your hostess speaks of financial troubles in clipped tones, a cancelled investment, a partner who soured. You wonder absurdly if someone whistled in the study. Later, while helping carry a tray to the scullery, a housemaid leans in and whispers, "Mr. Aldridge, the former butler, fired, whistled in the pantry. Week later, silver went missing, never found. Neither was he." She makes the sign of the cross. You chuckle nervously, but then you stop, because suddenly you're remembering every little tune you've ever hummed in the kitchen, every note piped absent-mindedly near a doorway or window or stair, and suddenly it feels less like melody and more like invitation. You learn that in some households, they used to keep a dish of salt near the door to counteract it. If someone accidentally whistled, they were expected to toss a pinch into the fire. "Feed the flame, feed the fortune," they'd say. Salt for balance, fire for protection. You begin to notice other things now, too. A coin nailed to the threshold. A boot hung above the cellar door. Tiny protections all around you, invisible until you knew to look. And now that you're looking, you realise you haven't heard anyone whistle since. That night, you catch yourself doing it again. Just a low whistle, barely audible, as you hang your coat near the hearth. You don't even realise it until the air changes, subtle but unmistakable. The candle beside you flickers hard to one side, though the window is shut tight. You freeze mid-note, and then clink. A coin rolls off the mantel and drops to the floor. You stare at it. A sixpence. You're sure it wasn't there before. You bend slowly to pick it up, but hesitate. You think of what the governor said, about whistling calling things in, and how poverty isn't just a matter of lack, but of leakage. Money that flows out without reason. Luck that dries up like a well. Health that wanes without warning. You leave the coin where it fell. In the morning, at breakfast, no one mentions the whistle, but you notice your hostess clutching her locket tightly. She drops her fork when someone jokes about losing money at cards. Even the maid seems jumpy. She spills the tea and mutters something under her breath that sounds like a prayer. And then, curiously, everyone glances up, toward the chimney. It's only later, walking past the front parlour, that you see something peculiar. A strip of iron nailed above the doorway. Discreet, painted over, but unmistakable now that you've learned to see. Iron wards off spirits, you recall, especially the ones that come when they're called. You ask the butler, quietly, about the coin that fell. He says nothing, but a few minutes later you notice it's gone from the floor, and in its place, a faint circle of ash. From that day forward you hum instead, low, wordless, a little tuneless perhaps, but safe. Humming, they say, keeps energy in. Whistling pushes it out. And when you travel to other homes, other towns, you start to notice it everywhere. The silence indoors, the tightly drawn mouths, the way older women hush even children who pipe a single careless note. One gentleman tells you in all seriousness that he lost his inheritance the same week he whistled while polishing his shoes. Didn't take it seriously, he admits, staring into his untouched coffee. And the next day, the will was rewritten. He doesn't whistle anymore, neither do you. Because whether or not it's true, whether or not the devil ever cared for tunes, one thing's certain. No one ever got rich from a whistle, and no coin rolls back uphill. You're staying with cousins in the country now, thick stone walls, ivy climbing the windows, a slow grandfather clock that chimes just behind the beat. The house is quiet except for the occasional gurgle of the new baby, who arrived only 3 weeks ago and already rules the household like a tiny monarch wrapped in muslin and milky sighs. It's the middle of the night when you wake to footsteps, soft, barefoot, purposeful. You rise, curious, and follow the sound down the hallway to the nursery. The door is cracked open, moonlight spilling in through a lace curtain. Inside, the nursemaid is pulling it closed, with urgency. She glances over her shoulder, sees you watching, and puts a finger to her lips. "The moon's out," she whispers. You nod, unsure why that matters. She finishes securing the heavy drape, checks the cradle, and breathes a little easier. The baby doesn't stir, but the nursemaid hovers for another moment anyway, placing a folded shawl at the base of the window and a sprig of sage on the sill. Only when she's satisfied does she explain. You must never let moonlight touch a baby's face. Ah, another superstition. But this one, it's new to you. She explains it softly, smoothing her apron. The old belief is that the moon's light, especially a full moon, can take something from a child. Their voice, their reason, their sleep, their strength. Not always right away, but it starts with a fever, or strange dreams, she pauses, or laughing when there's nothing to laugh at. You glance at the crib. The baby shifts but doesn't wake. A perfect little face, round as the moon itself. The idea sounds strange at first, but as the nursemaid lists the dangers, you start to hear echoes, stories you've heard in different places, under different names. Lunacy, moon sickness, moonstroke, even the word moonstruck, once romantic, now a warning. In Victorian England, where medicine was still fumbling in the dark, the line between illness and magic blurred easily. The moon, with its shifting face and invisible pull, was a suspect of many crimes. You remember reading about children who took ill after sleeping with a curtain open, about babies who grew quiet after being held outdoors during a waxing moon. Some were said to lose their soul through their open mouths, caught on a breath as the moonlight passed over them. To prevent this, some families placed iron scissors under the pillow. Others kept salt on the windowsill or burned lavender every night the moon was full. In Cornwall, mothers tied red ribbons around their babies' ankles to confuse the moon's gaze. In Yorkshire, they told tales of changelings taken under a harvest moon, and replaced with children who never cried, but never aged either. You glance back at the window. The curtain flutters slightly. The moonlight never quite touches the floor. But still, the nursemaid doesn't leave until dawn. Morning comes gently, filtered through the now safe curtain, and the baby wakes cooing, content. No fever, no eerie laughter, just the soft, gurgling music of a life still new to the world. Over breakfast you mention the nursemaid's precautions. Your cousin, spooning marmalade onto toast, nods without looking up. "Oh yes," she says casually. "We've always done that. Mother would have had a fit if moonlight touched a cradle. Swore it unhinged the little ones." She says it lightly, like reciting an old nursery rule, but then adds more quietly, "My brother didn't speak until he was 5. They blamed the moon. Said Nanny forgot to close the shutters once. We never proved it, of course, but ever since then, we've been careful." You ask around as the day goes on. Everyone seems to know a version of the rule. The cook says her aunt used to place a mirror outside the nursery window, facing outward, to reflect the moon away, like a shield. Or a warning, she adds. Let it see itself before it sees the child. The stable hand claims a neighbour once kept her baby in the cellar during the full moon phase, just to be sure. The poor little mite grew pale as cream, he says, but never cried at night. Never. And the gardener, he won't work after dusk during a waxing moon. Not near the rose beds. Moon pulls the madness up through the roots, he mutters, clipping a thorny vine. Same with babes. They draw it in with the milk if you're not watchful. You start to wonder whether this is really about babies at all, or about control in a world where so little feels certain. The Victorians feared the invisible, the intangible, the things that reached into bedrooms without knocking, and what's more intangible than light? Light that carries no weight but moves oceans, light that reflects the sun yet carries its own moods, waning, waxing, hiding, full. In a time when infant mortality was high and doctors were often useless, the moon became a kind of villain with a silver smile. You couldn't lock it out with a key, but you could draw a curtain, say a charm, place a blade beneath the pillow, or whisper a rhyme. Moonlight, stay away tonight, don't steal dreams or dull delight. Pass us by with silver grace, and leave no shadow on her face. You find yourself murmuring this one evening without thinking as you pass the nursery door. The baby sleeps, face soft and turned slightly to the side. The curtain holds steady. The moon, for now, stays away. And you? You start sleeping with your own drapes drawn, just in case. Because who knows what it's looking for? and what it might find. You've bought him a knife. It's a handsome little thing, folding with a mother-of-pearl handle and a fine steel blade. Not too grand, not too plain. Just right for a birthday gift. You picture your friend admiring it, testing its weight, maybe slicing an apple with the kind of casual precision only the British gentry seem to manage without effort. You wrap it in paper, tie a string, and tuck it into your coat pocket. The moment you hand it over, something shifts. He opens it slowly, turns it over in his palm, and just for a moment pauses. Then he laughs. "Lovely, really," he says. But there's something tight about it. His thanks come a bit too quickly, and before you can ask what's wrong, he reaches into his own pocket, pulls out a coin, an old copper farthing, and places it in your palm. "There," he says, tone suddenly lighter. "Now I've bought it off you. No harm done." You blink. "Bought it?" He nods. "You can't give a blade, old friend. Not unless you want to cut the bond. You're still holding the coin." The explanation comes later. Over tea. In Victorian England, gifting a knife, any blade in fact, was dangerous not because of the object itself, but because of what it symbolised. A knife severs. It divides. And when given freely, it's believed to slice through the ties between people. Friendship, love, even blood. "But," he says, sipping calmly now, "if it's bought, even for a token coin, the bond remains whole." The superstition runs deep. You learn of lovers who refuse to gift sewing kits or pocket scissors to one another, lest the relationship unravel. Husbands who quietly slipped a coin into their wives' hands after receiving cutlery as a wedding gift. One woman you meet tells you she buried a gifted knife in her garden, handle up, point down, after a falling out with her sister, claiming it bled the bitterness into the soil, and not just blades. Even sharp words, they believed, were metaphorically linked. Saying something cutting on a birthday or wedding day was feared to have the same effect. A split, a wound. Your friend smiles wryly as he pockets the knife. Better a coin lost than a friendship broken, eh? You keep the farthing, tuck it into your watch pocket where it sits warm against your leg. A symbol not of payment, but of preservation. Still, you think back to other moments, other gifts, and wonder if this was always known. You remember the straight razor your father gave you before your apprenticeship. You remember how you stopped speaking for a year afterward. The next day, you mention the knife story to the landlady at your lodging house, a woman of exacting manners and encyclopedic knowledge of Victorian faux pas. She doesn't just nod, she gasps. "You didn't give it without a coin, I hope?" You assure her the recipient paid you back, if only with a farthing. She exhales, relieved. "Good. Otherwise you'd have been bound for a quarrel before the week's out. Or worse, never see the poor man again. That's what happened to my Uncle Thomas and his neighbour. Traded pocket knives as boys. By 20, never spoke again. At 30, one was dead. No one knows why, but everyone knows why, if you understand me." She leans closer. Sharp things sharpen misfortune. You smile politely, but she's already off listing other cursed gifts. Handkerchiefs, she warns, invite sorrow unless paid for. You might as well hand someone a square of weeping. Clocks too, they tick toward endings. Best to pay a penny to keep time on your side. Even pearls must be purchased, or else they symbolise future tears. That's why you never give them to a bride unless she's fond of crying. It starts to feel as though the entire Victorian gift economy runs on secret transactions. Behind every well-meaning present, a silent superstition waits, ready to twist gratitude into grief. And it's not only gifts between friends. You meet a couple at a dinner party, married 40 years, who still insist on exchanging coins whenever a blade passes hands. "Even with the carving knife at Christmas," the wife laughs, but her eyes are serious. "One time I forgot and we fought for a month." You begin to wonder how much of this is belief, and how much is the excuse belief gives, a way to explain rifts, to soften sorrow, to offer a cause for chaos when none can be seen. But the weight of the farthing in your pocket says otherwise. You carry it still. Not because you believe exactly, but because deep down, something in you respects the rules of old bindings. The ones forged in silver and sweat and stories whispered over generations. Before you leave town, your friend invites you for lunch. As you part ways, he hands you a small parcel, wrapped in paper and tied with red twine. "Just a little something for the road," he says. "Don't worry, it's not sharp." You unwrap it that evening to find a small bone-handled fork and spoon, but tucked beneath them, a coin. Of course, because some things are better kept unbroken. It's a warm morning in the countryside, and you're standing in the middle of a garden that hums. At first you think it's the wind, or a distant cartwheel, but no, it's bees. Dozens of them, maybe hundreds. They float lazily from bloom to bloom, fat with nectar, wings shimmering in the sun. Their hive sits near the hedgerow, nestled between two elderberry trees, a simple white box but alive with motion. You've come here for a funeral. An old uncle, distant by blood but close enough by name to require attendance. He was a gentleman farmer, known for his pipe smoke, his stiff collars, and, most curiously, his bees. The service will be held this afternoon. But first you're told someone must tell the bees. You blink. Tell them? The housekeeper nods solemnly. They must be informed. It would be a grave insult otherwise. You follow her, half convinced she's joking, but her face is unreadable. She carries a scrap of black crepe in one hand and a pewter spoon in the other. As you near the hives, her pace slows. The hum grows louder. She gestures for you to stay a few steps back, and then she begins. She speaks low, clear, and deliberate, to the bees. "Little ones," she says, dipping the spoon gently into honey and letting a drop fall to the ground. "Your master has passed. He died in his sleep, peacefully. The house mourns, and we come to share the news with you." She then drapes the crepe across the top of the hive, pinning it with a small stone. "We wear black today," she says. "So must you." You stand stunned. She waits a moment, then nods to the hive. Now they know. You've stumbled into a tradition older than nearly everything else you've seen here. Telling the bees is no small ritual. It's essential. In many parts of Victorian England, bees were not just livestock. They were part of the household. Intimate, observant, and sensitive to grief. Fail to tell them of a death, and the consequences could be dire. The bees might stop making honey, they might leave the hive, or worse, they might die. Some said they would take the soul with them. You learn that in some homes they didn't just tell the bees, they included them. At weddings, brides would whisper their vows near the hive. At births, a spoon of honey was laid on the windowsill as a sweet offering. At deaths, like today, the bees were told the news dressed in mourning and sometimes even brought a bite of funeral cake. It's strange at first to think of insects as mourners, but the longer you stay by the hive, the more sense it makes. Because in a world ruled by superstition and symbolism, the bees are watchers, quiet, constant, keepers of rhythm and season. They vanish in winter, return in spring. They labour in silence, live in community, sting when provoked, and most of all, they remember. The funeral procession winds through the garden in the late afternoon, a quiet line of black umbrellas and low murmurs. The sun is filtered through thick clouds, and even the bees seem to buzz a little lower, as if observing the mood. At the edge of the hedgerow you glance back at the hives. The crepe still flutters there, damp now, sagging slightly from the mist in the air. A tiny sentinel of grief. As the casket is lowered, you watch the housekeeper slip away again, returning to the bees with a crumb of funeral sponge cake on a saucer. She places it carefully near the hive entrance. "Don't forget them," she says, almost absently. "They deserve a place at the table too." You wonder how many others have done the same, how many generations have kept bees not just as workers of honey, but as members of the family. There's a story told during the wake by a grey-haired cousin with a fondness for sherry. He speaks of a household in Devon where the bees were forgotten, left uninformed after the patriarch's sudden death. Within a week, the entire hive swarmed and vanished into the woods. The honey spoiled, the garden withered. "It's not just manners," he insists, "it's debt." You hear another tale, this one softer. A girl who sang to the bees after her mother died. Every morning she would sit beside the hive and whisper the day's events. It was like telling the story to someone who didn't interrupt, she'd said years later. They listened better than people. And why wouldn't they? The Victorians believed bees could sense more than humans, that they hummed with something older, that the veil between this world and the next fluttered thinly in their presence. Bees were not just messengers of honey, but of soul, of sorrow, of seasons turning. That night the housekeeper lights a candle near the window overlooking the hives. You stand beside her. They'll settle better now, she says, and you swear, you feel it too. A calmness in the garden, a stillness, as if the bees, having been told, can carry the grief forward, share it. Fold it into wax and wing beats and the quiet rhythm of their work. Before bed, you leave your own offering, a single sugar cube tucked beneath the sill, not because you believe exactly, but because someone should always tell the bees. The séance begins in total silence. No candles, no chanting, no theatrical knocking, yet. Just 8 people seated around a polished oak table, their fingers lightly touching. The room is dim, lit only by the orange glow of a dying hearth and the gas sconce flickering behind a red glass shade. You hadn't expected to be here, really. You'd only come for dinner. But when the conversation turned to unexplained things, and someone mentioned the tapping sounds upstairs, no one laughed. No one dismissed it. Someone simply cleared the table, and someone else fetched the spirit board. Of course they had one. This is a Victorian parlour, after all, where belief in science and belief in spirits often sat side by side, pouring tea for one another with equal civility. You glance around. The hostess, Mrs. Hargrave, is pale but poised. Her daughter stares straight ahead, unmoving. The clergyman's wife keeps one hand tucked beneath the tablecloth. And you? Your fingers are on the planchette, its smooth wood worn shiny from dozens, perhaps hundreds of previous questions. The air feels charged, like a storm might be waiting in the walls. Mrs. Hargrave clears her throat. "We ask," she says, voice soft but sure, "for any presence in this room to make itself known." The planchette shifts, not much, just a twitch. You assume it was someone else, but then it moves again, stronger. It slides to the yes on the board. No one speaks. The hostess continues. "Are you from this house?" The planchette moves again. Yes. You glance toward the ceiling. You hadn't noticed it before, but one corner of the room is darker than the rest, just slightly. Someone asks, "Do you mean us harm?" It jerks, quickly, to no. But somehow, that answer isn't comforting. You later learn this séance isn't the first. Mrs. Hargrave has done this many times, ever since her youngest daughter died. The one no one mentions. The one whose room remains locked upstairs, the key stored in a silver snuff box under the piano. They've tried to contact her before with mixed results. Sometimes it's her, says the daughter who remains. Sometimes it isn't. Tonight, you get knocks, 3 of them, soft but distinct, on the parlour wall. Not the door, not the floorboards, the wall. Mrs. Hargrave rises immediately, snuffs the gaslight and calls the séance closed, and just like that, it's over. No goodbyes, no final question, no flourish, only a low hush and the sound of your own breath catching in your chest. Later in the hallway you linger by the staircase. The upstairs landing is barely visible in the gloom. You squint upward and catch the glint of something that reflects but does not shine. A glass doorknob, perhaps, or an eye. You don't go up. In the guest room that night you hear tapping again. Not loud, just one tap, then another, then silence. You stare at the wall, and wait for the third. You wait. The third knock never comes. Not that night. But something else does. Around 2 a.m. you wake to the smell of lavender. Not the gentle floral drift from sachets or soaps, but something stronger, damp, earthy, rooted. Like wilted petals pressed between pages of a book no one opens anymore. You sit up in bed. The room is dark, but the scent is vivid. So vivid, in fact, that it seems to pulse with the heartbeat in your ears. You remember what Mrs. Hargrave said before retiring? If you hear anything, don't respond. That's how they know you're listening. You get up anyway. There's no wind. The curtains don't move. The fire's gone cold. And yet the lavender lingers. You move toward the door and gently crack it open. The hallway's empty. Dim gaslight flickers against the patterned wallpaper, casting long, twitching shadows along the staircase. And then you hear it. Tap. Just one. On the wall behind you. You turn slowly. The same wall where the séance was held earlier that evening. The same wall that answered back. It's silent now. But when you wake the next morning, there's a faint smudge on the wallpaper just behind your chair, like soot or fingerprints. 5 of them. Small. Low to the ground. Mrs. Hargrave doesn't look surprised when you mention it. You're lucky, she says over toast. It wasn't knocking to come in. Sometimes the knocking is trying to call someone out. Lee, you don't ask what that means, but she tells you anyway. There's a story, she begins, of a maid who mocked a séance. She knocked from the other side of the wall to frighten her mistress. 3 times, just for mischief. You nod slowly. She died in her sleep that night. Your fork hovers over the eggs. She choked. No illness, no warning, and there were marks on her throat, like bruises, in the shape of fingers. You put your fork down. The others at the table keep eating as if they've heard this all before. You glance toward the parlour. The spirit board is gone, but the air still feels watchful. That afternoon you quietly slip a small silver thimble into your pocket and place it under your pillow that night. Something a housemaid swore keeps the tapping out. It doesn't matter if it's true, because the knocks haven't stopped. They just come from farther away now. A slow migration, from the wall to the ceiling. You've caught a cold. Not a dramatic, swooning on the chaise sort of illness, but enough to make your head swim and your nose rebel. Your host, ever hospitable, insists you not return to the city just yet. Rest, she says kindly. We've plenty of remedies. That's your first warning. You lie bundled on a fainting couch by the fire, teacup in hand, when the housekeeper enters carrying what appears to be a small cloth-wrapped bundle. She unwraps it with care. Inside, a dead mouse. You sit up too quickly. Is that boiled, she says with a shrug, pounded with molasses, for the chest? You decline, but not before you learn this is no idle prank. In Victorian households, especially rural ones, mouse paste was considered a legitimate cure for everything from whooping cough to sore throats. Some prepared it as a syrup, others fried it and mashed it into butter, still warm. Mothers rubbed it onto infants' gums to soothe teething. One newspaper column even recommended it lightly charred, then mixed with honey for best effect. You choose to suffer your cough, but the parade of peculiar cures has just begun. Later that day, another visitor arrives. A neighbour woman with bright eyes and a basket full of odds and ends. "I heard you weren't well," she says cheerfully, and without waiting pulls out a linen pouch filled with mouldy bread. You place it right on the throat, she says, mould side in, draws out the fever. You stare. It turns out she's referring to the old belief that mould had cleansing properties, something Victorian medicine hadn't quite proven yet, but which folklore had embraced for centuries. Blue mould, in particular, was favoured for wounds and swollen glands. "There's power in decay," she adds, as though she's quoting scripture. You're offered a dozen more so-called cures over the next few hours. A rag soaked in turpentine and bound around your chest keeps the spirits from settling. Onion slices tucked into your socks pulls the poison downward. Goose grease mixed with soot chased out the croup in my nephew. He's 30 now and still coughing but alive. Bread crusts burned and crumbled into warm milk, sipped under a blanket. You begin to wonder if the illness is preferable to the remedies. But they mean well. That's the strangest part. These aren't cruel jokes or old wives' tales tossed out in desperation. These are gifts. Wisdom passed down, pressed into hands and whispered across generations, all based on the same hope, that something simple and strange might help, even if it smells like boiled rodent. That night sleep eludes you. The house is quiet, the fire burned low, and you lie beneath layers of quilts that smell faintly of mothballs and lavender oil. Your chest still aches, your throat still stings. But your mind, it races with images of the day. The mouse, the mould, the hot cloth soaked in turpentine that still tingles faintly on your ribs, despite your best efforts to wash it off. You sit up with a cough and a groan, only to find another offering at your bedside, a jam jar. Inside, something brown, thick, oily. There's a note tied to the neck in looping, careful script. Swallow a spoonful at midnight, for the lungs and the soul. You don't ask what's in it. You don't want to know. Instead, you stare into the darkness and reflect on the deep Victorian need to fight illness with anything at hand, even if that means turning to misery itself. You remember the story your hostess told over tea about a grandmother who swore by a cure for nosebleeds, binding the patient's toes with string soaked in vinegar, then chanting "out, out" 3 times. The blood would stop, she claimed, not because of medicine, but because the body became confused. Confusion, it seems, was a valid form of healing. Divert the illness, trick it, trap it, suffocate it with soot and sweat and salted onions. And in the middle of this war, the patient, helpless, coughing, becomes the battlefield. You get up, walk softly to the wash basin, and pour the jar's contents down the drain. It lands with a wet splat. You don't care if it worked for Uncle Harold in 1849. You'll take your chances with hot lemon water and sleep. Still, as you lie back down, you begin to understand. In a world without antibiotics, where cholera could ride the water and diphtheria stole children in their sleep, doing something, anything, was better than doing nothing. Even if it meant rubbing ferret blood on your temples, even if it meant keeping a crushed snail in your pocket for nerve pain, even if it meant waking in the night, breathless, to find your neighbour placing leeches behind your ears and whispering, "This'll draw the spirits out." You close your eyes and smile. Sick or not, at least no one's brought the leeches yet, and if they do, you might just hide under the bed and pretend to be cured. The graveyard is lovely this time of year. Not a phrase you thought you'd ever think, but here you are, walking along mossy paths between rows of leaning headstones, watching your breath ghost into the crisp morning air. The trees are bare, the earth damp, and a faint mist lingers just above the grass as if reluctant to leave. You've come to visit a distant relative's plot, a duty more than a desire. But what catches your eye isn't the inscription on any stone. It's the bells, tiny ones, dozens of them, affixed atop slender rods beside certain graves, or mounted directly on wrought iron railings above the earth. Some are rusted, others shiny, but each has a delicate wire running down into the ground, into the coffin. You freeze. You've heard of this before. Safety coffins, designed not for the dead but for the living, mistaken for dead. It was a very real Victorian terror, being buried alive, and not entirely unfounded. Diagnoses in the 19th century were often more guesswork than science. A sudden coma, an illness with shallow breathing, a faint pulse. Any of these could be misread. Doctors, pressed for time or unsure, would sometimes pronounce a person dead when they were merely unconscious. And so, the inventions began. Bells on strings like the ones you see now, glass viewing windows placed in coffin lids, breathing pipes, even complex systems with flags, whistles, or spring-loaded hammers meant to alert the cemetery keeper if someone down below decided to dispute the terms of their departure. The Victorians didn't call these safety devices. They called them security against premature interment. You read one inscription carved into a base of ironwork. Sleep in peace, but if you wake, ring true. There's something almost tender about it. Almost. You walk among the graves, counting the bells. 16, 17, 18. Not every plot has one, of course. Only the families who could afford the extra precaution. Death was expensive, but fear was priceless. You wonder how many times a bell rang, and if anyone answered. There are rumours, of course, urban legends. One about a coffin found scratched on the inside, its bell missing, its string snapped. Another of a bell that rang for 3 days in the rain before someone came. Too late. You stop at one particularly ornate grave, a woman's, judging by the name. The bell at its head is still intact, its wire taut, disappearing into the ground like a question with no answer. You imagine the sound, soft but insistent. Ding, ding. Was it hope or panic? You find the caretaker near the chapel, bundled in wool and smelling faintly of oil and tobacco. He's repairing a fallen gate hinge, but when you ask about the bells, he straightens and wipes his hands on his coat. "Aye," he says, nodding toward the graveyard. "Had a few left over from the old days. Most don't know what they're for anymore. Think it's just a pretty touch," you press gently. "Did any ever ring?" He pauses, eyes narrowing slightly, then shrugs. "Depends who you ask." He tells you about a rector's wife buried after a long sudden illness. 3 days after the funeral, the groundskeeper claimed to hear faint clinking late at night. By the time anyone bothered to dig her up, the inside of the coffin had scratches, deep ones. The bell's wire had snapped clean. The death certificate still said typhus. Another tale, less tragic, more absurd, involves a man who awoke underground, rang the bell furiously, and was actually saved. Afterward, he sued the doctor, wrote a short book about it, and lived another 20 years, never sleeping without a window open and a knife under his pillow. You don't know whether to believe these stories, but you also don't entirely disbelieve them, because something about that fear, that very specific fear of being aware, awake, and trapped beneath 6 feet of soil, is universal, timeless. You pass one bell that's been wrapped in black ribbon, its clapper removed. "Family didn't want to tempt fate," the caretaker mutters. "Some prefer quiet, even in panic." Inside the chapel, there's a display case of oddities. Among them, a pamphlet titled The Problem of Premature Burial, published in 1844. It includes diagrams of elaborate coffin ventilation systems, including one that allows the buried individual to signal distress by tugging on a cord connected to a flagpole above ground. The flag reads, "Alive." You imagine walking through a cemetery and seeing that, fluttering silently on a windy hill, its message plain and terrible. You look again at the bells outside. They seem quaint now, rusted, still. But you wonder if, somewhere in the hush of an English night, one ever moved. Just slightly, just enough to call someone back. The caretaker locks the chapel for the evening and tips his cap. "Folks think death is sleep," he says, "but it's not always so tidy." As you leave the graveyard, your eyes flick to the last bell in the row. The wire is pulled ever so slightly taut. You tell yourself it's just gravity, just age. Still, you walk a little faster, because no matter how civilized the Victorians pretended to be, they never stopped fearing the moment the ground might knock back. It's a double affair today, 2 ceremonies under one roof. Upstairs, lace and lilies. Downstairs, jet beads and silence. You've been invited to a wedding, but as you arrive at the country manor, it's clear that the household is divided. The eldest daughter, radiant in ivory and roses, is marrying a naval officer in the drawing room. Her great-aunt, a recent widow, is hosting her morning reception just 2 floors below. And in true Victorian fashion, both events are governed by rigid, exquisite rules. You head first to the wedding. White bunting, champagne, violin music in the air. The bride wears a veil nearly 6 feet long, so delicate it's practically floating. You overhear someone say it was her grandmother's, worn on her own wedding day in 1849, and again by an aunt in 1872. It's not just a keepsake, it's protection. Victorians believed that a bride's veil shielded her from spirits, envy, and misfortune, especially as she transitioned from maiden to wife. Without it, the moment of marriage was seen as dangerously exposed, ripe for supernatural meddling, and the veil had to be lifted by the groom alone. If anyone else did it, bad luck. If the bride tripped on it, worse. If she forgot it entirely, well, best not to speak of that. As the vows are exchanged, you notice several young women clutching gloves tightly, eyes flitting toward a shadowed figure at the back of the room, the great-aunt. dressed head to toe in widow's weeds, heavy black crape, gloves, veil, not of silk but of bombazine, thick and matte. Even her buttons are made of jet. No jewellery glints, no laughter escapes her lips. She's been a widow for 6 weeks, and therefore is permitted to attend only if she makes no sound and stands behind all mirrors. You later learn this wasn't personal, it was protocol. Victorian mourning culture was its own intricate system, a kind of etiquette-based grief choreography. First mourning, second mourning, half mourning, each with its own rules about colour, fabric, speech, and social engagement. You spot the widow's daughter clutching something in her hand. At first glance it looks like a locket, but it's not. It's a brooch made of human hair. You blink. It's arranged in delicate curls beneath a piece of glass like brown lace. The frame is silver. There are initials engraved on the back. You ask, gently, and she explains. "Father's hair," she says. "Woven by mother. A mourning token." You've heard of these before. Hair jewellery was astonishingly popular in the 19th century, especially during mourning. Braided, curled, even stitched into shapes of flowers or birds, it was often worn close to the heart. Lockets, rings, or tucked into watch chains. Some were made by professionals, others crafted at home from locks cut on a deathbed. Because when the body's gone, hair remains. It doesn't decay, it clings, it comforts. In the same way a bride's veil is meant to hide, a widow's hair brooch is meant to remember. One shields you from fate, the other anchors you to it. As the wedding party moves toward the garden for photographs, the atmosphere brightens. Champagne flows, children tug at cake ribbons, and someone begins tuning a fiddle. The white veil dances in the breeze, trailing behind the bride like a cloud of lace-dusted promise. But you slip away, down the back stair where the air is heavier and the light more respectful. The morning room is quiet. Muted conversations drift in like fog. The great-aunt sits motionless, her hands folded over a black prayer book. A cluster of women, all in varying shades of grey and lavender, speak in low tones about rheumatism and lilies of the valley. And then you see it again. More hair. This time it's in a frame. An entire wreath, delicately shaped into forget-me-nots and ferns, arranged in a perfect oval under convex glass. You lean in. The strands are of different shades, blonde, auburn, coal black, intertwined. Family, someone whispers behind you. 4 generations, cut at birth, marriage, and death. You don't know whether to shiver or smile. This wasn't macabre in their eyes. It was intimacy, sentiment, a way to touch the past, literally. You begin to see how everything in the Victorian world had a physical token. A veil to block what was coming, a lock of hair to remember what had gone. You're offered a piece of mourning cake, dense, dark, laced with cloves. You eat in silence, watching as one of the younger widows carefully pins her hair back using a comb set with jet beads. Even accessories had rules. No pearls in first mourning, no colour at all for at least 3 months. Jewellery with gems had to be dull, understated, more memory than ornament. At the end of the hall hangs a portrait. A couple from decades ago, seated stiffly. He stares ahead. She clutches a book, but around her neck you now recognise it. A locket made of plaited hair, its loop the same tawny gold as the braid beneath the glass. You wonder how many other portraits you've passed, missing that same detail. How many museums display hair as if it were just thread when really, it's a message. Back upstairs the bride tosses her bouquet. Laughter, satin shoes brushing across gravel, the future thrown joyfully into the air. But down here, in the quiet half of the house, you see the other side of the thread, the one that doesn't unravel, the one that holds tight. You walk once more between the veiled and the unveiled, and for a moment it feels like 2 ceremonies of equal weight, one for beginnings, one for endings, and both somehow dressed in strands of hair. You're strolling through a bustling Victorian street, market stalls on either side, smells of horse dung and warm bread mingling in the autumn air, when a woman suddenly grabs your arm. "Stop!" she hisses. eyes wide. You freeze, instinctively checking your coat for a dropped glove or loose coin. But no, her gaze is fixed ahead, at the corner just before you, and then you see it. A black cat perched on the curb staring directly at you. It blinks once. Then, in the slow, theatrical way of all cats who know they're being watched, it steps forward and crosses the path. "Go around," the woman mutters. You hesitate because it's just a cat, but every other pedestrian is already veering, not dramatically, just subtly, crossing the street, pausing to inspect a shop window, or suddenly remembering they meant to turn down the alley instead. No one crosses directly behind it. You follow their lead. Because here, in the open air of ordinary life, superstition is everywhere. Not hidden in drawing rooms or whispered at funerals, but woven into the fabric of daily movement. You pass a flower vendor muttering over her cart after someone knocked over her bucket of daisies. "That'll be a fight in the house tonight," she grumbles. A chimney sweep tosses salt over his shoulder after brushing against a lamppost. A delivery boy whistles once, then slaps his own hand and mutters, "Stupid." You spot a group of children skipping rope, singing, "Step on a crack and mother goes black, step on a line and father won't dine." You've heard versions of that rhyme before, but here it's not just play, it's practice. In this world, cracks mean broken backs, mirrors trap souls, and spilling salt isn't just clumsy. It's an invitation for misfortune to take a seat at your table. Even ladders are treated like cursed scaffolds. You watch a well-dressed man nearly trip into a puddle just to avoid passing beneath one propped against a storefront. You ask someone why. Ladders form a triangle, they say, and stepping through it breaks the trinity. You wait for the joke, but there isn't one. And don't even think of tipping your hat indoors. A young shop clerk does exactly that, then abruptly replaces it and whispers an apology to the air. You glance up and see a small horseshoe nailed above the door, facing upward, always upward. "To keep the luck in," someone says, downward and it pours out. It's dizzying at first. How many rules seem to govern every step, every movement, every breath? But after a while, it begins to make sense. In a world filled with soot, sickness, poverty, and unpredictable grief, control is a luxury, but a rhyme, a gesture, a habit. Those are free. Those give the illusion of safety, and sometimes illusion is enough. You stop at a bakery window to admire a tray of currant buns when you hear a gasp behind you. A young woman, walking briskly, has just broken her stride to avoid stepping on 3 consecutive paving stones. She mutters under her breath, then pulls a tiny charm from her pocket and kisses it. You catch a glimpse. It's a small silver coin pierced through the centre, strung on a ribbon. "Protection," she says when she notices you looking. "My mother's, passed down." Then, with a faint blush, she adds, "I know it's silly, but it feels wrong not to." And that's the thing. The people here don't always believe these things. Not exactly. But they behave as though they do because not behaving feels worse, unnatural, tempting fate. You overhear a conversation between 2 older gentlemen debating whether sweeping after dark will sweep away prosperity. One argues it's nonsense. The other refuses to lift a broom after sundown just in case. "Lost my uncle the same week I swept under the stairs," he says, sombre. You visit a milliner's shop next and see a display of wedding hats. Tucked among the lace and ribbon are tiny printed tags that read, "No green hats for brides, jealousy will follow." A passing girl reads it aloud and shudders. "Greens for the fairies," she says. "They don't like to share." Ah yes, the fair folk. Even in the heart of industrial England, with trains whistling and smog choking the sky, people still nod to the unseen. They leave crusts of bread on windowsills. They murmur charms when passing hawthorn trees. They never name a baby before it's baptized, for fear the fae might steal it. You stop beside a man selling trinkets from a barrow. "Anti-witch thimbles," he says proudly, jangling a tin cup of them. Keeps their gaze off your sewing. Nearby a sign reads, "Left-handed scissors. Do not use if born under a waning moon." You start to laugh, then hesitate. because part of you, just a little quiet part, has begun to wonder if maybe all this nonsense holds something. Maybe the world is in fact as odd and dangerous as these people behave, and if a black cat crossing your path means waiting 5 seconds longer at the corner, well, perhaps that's not a bad trade for staying out of the undertaker's line. A bell rings as someone exits a shop. The horseshoe above the door rattles but doesn't fall. A good sign. You smile to yourself and step carefully over a puddle, not because it's muddy, but because your reflection winked at you. And in the Victorian world, that could mean anything. You wake to the steady clop of hooves outside your window, sunlight filtering through thick lace curtains, and a faint scent of coal smoke lingering in the room like a memory. It's your final day here. You stretch, feeling the stiffness of a feather-stuffed mattress beneath your back, and step into your boots with the care of someone who's learned not to tug them on with your left hand, just in case. Superstition clings to you now like fog on wool. You've absorbed more than you meant to, and yet you're not ready to let go of it. Because the truth is, in this world, where everything from a broken teacup to the way you pin your hat can influence your luck, superstition isn't silliness, it's structure, it's comfort. You stroll through town one last time, a tinker offers you a brass charm to keep the devil from your hearth, you buy it. Not because you believe in devils, but because you've seen what not believing looks like. A cracked mirror, a wedding without rosemary, a child's cradle turned the wrong way, and you felt the chill of everyone. Outside the apothecary, a sign catches your eye. Feeling hexed, consult Mrs. Pettigrew, leeching and lavender. You chuckle, remembering your visit to her parlour. Her eyes rimmed in kohl, her parrot that squawked, "Beware the milkman," every 15 minutes. And yet she had a line of customers every morning, sailors, spinsters, shopkeepers, all willing to part with coins for blessings, charms, or just a whisper of reassurance. Even Parliament wasn't immune. You recall a story you overheard in a tea shop, that during Victoria's reign, a well-known MP refused to sit beside a colleague born under a cursed date. He'd switch chairs when no one was looking. The other man never knew. But somehow, he always fell ill before major votes. Coincidence? Or just clever sabotage disguised as old wives' tales? That's the dangerous thing about superstition. It makes anything possible, and it makes everyone vulnerable, including the Queen herself. You pass by Buckingham Palace, its gates glinting. The stories swirl. Victoria wore black for 40 years, not just for Albert, but to keep death from returning. She consulted mediums. She believed in signs. She once refused to travel on a particular date because her footman saw a dog with 2 different coloured eyes. And who could argue? She reigned for over 6 decades. Maybe fear kept her alive, or maybe it just kept her human. Because that's what these beliefs are in the end. Not marks of ignorance, but little prayers in disguise. Small gestures, salt-tossed, lace-veiled, hair-clipped, bells tied, that say, "Please, let this day be kind." The fog rolls in as the evening draws close, soft, silvery, wrapping the rooftops in hush and half-light. You find yourself on a narrow lane at the edge of town, just beyond the chapel and the cemetery wall. There's a crooked little cottage there, smoke curling from its chimney, roses curling round its gate, and standing at the threshold is an old woman in a faded green shawl, one hand resting on a walking stick carved with runes. She eyes you with curiosity, then with knowing. You hesitate, and she gestures you in. Inside, the scent of beeswax, dried thyme, and old paper fills the room. Every surface is cluttered. Jars of herbs, wax seals, tiny bones, teeth, feathers, scraps of ribbon. A child's shoe nailed above the hearth. A dish of water on the windowsill, a mirror turned to the wall. She doesn't speak at first, just pours tea. Then she sits across from you and says simply, "You've walked through it all, haven't you?" You nod, and realise she doesn't mean just today. You've walked through the salt lines and the charms, the whispers and the rituals, through laughter and unease, through rooms thick with perfume to ward off spirits, and kitchens where knives are never passed hand to hand. You've seen the way superstition shaped not just moments, but identities, how it stitched itself into every sleeve, every wedding ring, every baby's cradle and coffin pillow. The old woman offers you a silver button. No explanation, no smile, just places it in your palm. You'll need that, she says, and you believe her. You don't ask why. Because now, at the end of it all, you understand. In the Victorian world, superstition wasn't just the fringe, it was the fabric, worn smooth by generations, embroidered into the folds of daily life. A means of survival, yes, but also of meaning, of connection, to ancestors, to fear, to fate. You step out into the night, the button warm in your hand. Behind you, the woman disappears into shadow, and ahead, a world that suddenly feels full of signs. You tuck the button in your coat, not because you're afraid, but because in some quiet ancestral way, it feels like respect. You walk on. The moon glows pale behind chimney stacks. Somewhere a dog howls once and falls silent, and you think, maybe all these gestures, these tiny rituals of worry and hope, aren't so strange after all. Maybe they're what make us human. Maybe they're the oldest kind of story, one told not with words but with buttons, ribbons, glances and salt. The streets are empty now. The gas lamps hum faintly, their glow softened by the mist. You take slow, careful steps, your boots barely scuffing the cobblestones. A hush settles in your chest, not fear, not even caution, but something gentler, something like understanding. The world you've just walked through was not one of monsters or magic spells. No dragons, no wizards, just ordinary people doing ordinary things in extraordinarily careful ways, tying bits of red thread around baby cradles, avoiding green at weddings, knocking on wood not because they believed in trees, but because they believed in trying. And maybe that's what all this really was, a way to push back against the unknown, because life was brutal. Death came quick. Illness stole names from dinner tables without warning, and in a place where science hadn't yet caught up to suffering, superstition offered a balm, a rhythm, a rule book, a whispered promise that maybe, just maybe, if you got the rhyme right, if you wore the charm, if you never lit 3 candles in a row, then your world would hold together one more day. You feel it still. The echo of a rhyme in your ears, the weight of that silver button in your pocket, the invisible thread that runs through us all, ancient, anxious, and oddly comforting. Tonight you've wandered through lace-curtained parlours and mossy graveyards. You've met brides, widows, bakers, and barrowmen, each of them clutching their own small hopes in the form of a veil, a locket, a pinch of salt. And now you return to yourself, to your bed, to your breath. Let the curtains fall. Let the fog drift away. Let your limbs grow heavy with stillness. There are no broken mirrors here, no ladders, no watching eyes, just rest, safe and soft, guarded perhaps by nothing more than a story, but sometimes that's enough.